Welcome everyone. We're going to go through portal functionality in Syteline, and many of you probably know that they've renamed the product to CloudSuite Industrial. I've gotten in the habit of calling it that now, or CSI, but many of us, will always know it as Syteline. So we're going to walk through portal functionality. Got a little bit of a PowerPoint here. Mostly we'll actually show software. This may not last an hour. It's largely a functionality overview. We might try to touch on some of the technical issues, although I'm not as technically savvy as some. But we'll get you a good overview of what the portals can do. So if you look there on the second slide, definition, this is a web-based set of tools to allow you to work with your partners, customers, vendors, and resellers. So there's actually sort of what you can think of as three different modules: a customer portal, a reseller portal, and a vendor portal. A reseller is a company that you sell product to that then resells it. So they may be linked to multiple customers. Also, in this little note there I put at the bottom of that, we're not going to see this today because it's licensed separately and it's really a different product. But when you talk about portals within Now, there is also an employee self-service portal that's designed for HR and payroll-related functional concerns. It's the kind of thing that allows an employee to access payroll and HR information over a website, a web portal. It's actually pretty clever. We probably will not get to that today. All right. Now, licensing, I'm not prepared to sort of tell you the pricing of these things. I just want to give you an idea that when you license the portals, you get licenses for all three: customer, vendor, and reseller. And it's typically sold with a base price and with then a per user fee. And the licensing model is named users. So that's a little bit about how it's licensed. Now, let's look. This is a slide about the functional capabilities of the customer portal. And if you look at that slide, I'd have you think of it in the two that are on there. First one says web storefront. So the customer portal has a fairly traditional, web storefront order entry capability. Notice we have a point there that says business to business and business to consumer. It's probably an interface that lends itself a little bit more to B2B. You'll see it. But it can be used in a B2C situation. Below that, you see a whole bunch of sort of inquiry data that you can get on the customer portal, and some of it's pretty handy. Things like order status. Down about halfway down, it says invoices and reprint invoices. There's a whole bunch of these things. I'll walk through those in the software. This slide is about the reseller portal. Again, it's designed for customers that purchase material from a company and then resell it. So its functionality is very similar to the customer portal. And I put this third point in here. I'm not sure why I put it on in this section, but keep in mind, some of you folks may be aware of row authorization functionality that they added to the system a few versions back. I think it was in Syteline 8. And row authorization functionality is what is deployed here to make sure, for example, a customer can only see access to their orders, their quotes, their inventory, etc. So that's an important piece of the puzzle. There's a couple other bullet points there about the reseller functionality. Next slide is related to the vendor portal, and it does things you might expect: PO inquiry. One thing that's interesting, where it says planned order inquiry and firming, that's what we're trying to emphasize there. That if a vendor is set up as the preferred #1 ranked supplier for a particular part, over the portal they can see MRP or APS planned orders, orders that the Syteline CloudSuite system has planned through the material planning system, and on the portal they can see those and actually firm up the PO. and include a delivery date in the process. So I won't read all of those, but we'll see some of the other functional capabilities when we walk through the portal. We won't do all these, but we'll touch on several of them. So that's vendor portal functionality. So I'm going to veer off now. I'm going to give you a little demo on both of these. We'll start with the customer portal. So I'm going to come now to my system environment. And what you're looking at here is one of the screens in the customer portal. I'm going to hit that little drop down there where it says activity. Okay, and notice all of these activities are the things I identified a few minutes ago. So, for example, if I hit order status, by the way, my interface is slow. I apologize for that. I don't think it's representative of the performance you'll experience. I just have a particularly slow environment. But when I selected order status, what I'm getting is a list of open orders for the customer in question. Now keep in mind, in my demonstration scenario, there's one particular customer I'm working with. It's called Coordinated Bicycles. And we're only seeing information related to that customer. So on the order status page, I can do things like this. It's showing me all the orders. It's actually not open orders, it's all orders. And then I can do various searches. So if the customer, they may know their PO number. So, oops, I typed that in wrong. There's a PO number, and you hit filter, and it's going to condense the list to that particular record. And there you're seeing their PO number, and here's the internal tracking number in Syteline, CloudSuite. And from this, we can expand it. And we're seeing things like this is the product that was shipped, there's the quantity, there's the ship date. I could go over and hit the view order tracking information. For you got a few folks that use pick, pack, and ship and pull in tracking information, that would be made available here. So you got a lot of information here. There's also a little note over here where if there's any documents that are attached to this order, I could see them there as well. But this is a very typical use of the portal from a standpoint, the customer portal, from a standpoint of looking at order status. So that's order status. If I come back up to the activity menu selection, I could come down to estimates. And estimates, you folks know, those are quotes. And this page is pulling up. Here again, I could search by an item. I'm going to search on the FA 30,000 bicycle, and there I'm seeing a quote. And again, I could expand that. And maybe at this point I could see that in addition to the FA 30,000, this quote also includes a couple other bicycles. But this is where the customer could see the status of the quote or the estimate, and then also submit some questions about it. So that's quoting or estimating. Just to give you a few other examples here. There's access to Syteline RMAs under the returns menu selection. For you folks that are using RMAs, this is data related to RMAs, and it's the same kind of thing. I could look at RMAs based on a particular RMA number or for a particular item, and I'm finding records, and then I'm expanding and looking at data. So what we're seeing here is a whole lot of sort of inquiry into data that's related to this particular customer. A couple others here. If we go to activity and go to account balance, this is handy. This is where a customer, in this case, Coordinated Bicycles, can see all their open invoices, or really all their AR activity in aging buckets, and then as you scroll down the page, you see invoice detail. And from there, I can do things like This is a particular invoice. If I click that, it allows me to reprint the invoice. So some nice functionality there. In fact, that kind of leads over to, if I go back to activity and invoices, this is a sort of a different way to sort of drill into invoice detail. And here again, if I know, maybe the customer in question is searching by their PO number, and when they hit the filter button, they see there's the invoice that's related to that order, and they could very easily reprint the invoice. Or they could look at the details of that order. Okay. Now, let's go back up to the activity menu selection. And by the way, as you see I'm doing, for the most part, I've been going to the activity menu selection. In a few minutes, we're going to go over and go to the shop menu selection. That's where we're going to actually place an order online. Let's look at inventory for a minute. Now, a lot of you folks know about what used to be called customer item cross-reference in Syteline, or now it's called customer contracts. But that kind of data is being displayed here. So, for example, if I see item BI-1300, that's the customer's part number. If I were to go to Syteline right now and maybe look at, excuse me, I gotta maybe look at the customer contracts form back in sort of Syteline proper, I can see that for coordinated bicycles, item BI-1300 is internal item number FA20000. So if I come back to the portal now, there I see BI-1300, okay, and if I expand that, I see information like inventory in my various warehouses. In this case, in my main warehouse, I have 2,789 units. I also have quantity available data. Now, just to sort of link that back to where that might be seen in Syteline, if we come back to Syteline and we look at the item availability form, basically what you're seeing here is this information over here, quantity available. So on hand in a warehouse, allocations, open order allocations, and then quantity available. So, some of you folks may use that form in Syteline, but we just wanted you to see that that's essentially what kind of data is being displayed here on an inventory availability form. So that's, we spent a lot of time there looking at various inquiries. Just a couple of things. I won't go into them in a whole lot of detail. But there's things like interactions. Some of you folks may use the customer interactions back in Syteline. It used to be called customer communications log. And that's a place for a customer, your customer and the company to sort of have online interactions, sending email back and forth through interaction functionality. Documents, again, is then any kind of electronic documents that are relevant to that customer. Announcements is a place, there's a form back in Syteline that allows you to make sort of broadcast company announcements, like maybe the facility might be closed during a particular time period. That can be displayed in the portal. If we come over to service, I don't know with the folks we have online whether we have any people using the Field Service Plus module, or what's now called service. But there's some nice features here. So, for example, if I go to incidents, that's a sort of a gateway into looking at service incidents for this particular customer. So again, you get a lot of the same kind of capability where you could look for something and then drill into the details, so the customer gets the chance to do that. Okay, now let's look at the idea of online ordering. So instead of using the activity menu selection, we're going to come over to shop. And there's a variety of ways that you can initiate an online order. Some of this has the feel of maybe an Amazon experience, maybe not as sophisticated. Again, this is probably oriented to B2B scenarios. One of the most basic things I can do at this point is just hit the place order button. So I clicked place order, and that's just going to give me an opportunity. Let's say you have a very tight relationship with this particular customer. So I can do things like this. Say, well, I know I want some quantity of the FA 10,000 bike. So I put in a quantity there, and I hit add to order. And when I did that, I'm sort of queuing up an order now. If you look up in this area, I have a cart that I can look into details, and I could drill down. But it's starting the process of entering an online order. I could certainly come over here and do this as well. I could say, in addition to that, I want some FA 20,000s. I have a quantity of one of that, and I hit add to order. Now you can see in my cart up here I have 2 items. Okay, I can do certain things like at this point, because I haven't really committed anything, I can remove, I can change quantities, etc. I can even do things like ship the products to different locations. Okay, or I could start walking through the process of processing the order. Here's where I could change the shipping address, or I could just hit continue. When I hit continue, it's going to give me down here where I can start indicating payment information. If you have the credit card interface, it talks with that. If not, it can't. But it does talk with the credit card interface. And here's where you can indicate a shipping method. I'll go ahead and just say UPS. All right. And I hit continue. And this is kind of a last opportunity to make changes. But let's go ahead and get a before and after picture. If I go back into Syteline or CloudSuite, I'm going to pull up the customer orders form. Notice I have 6 orders here. I have this filtered for orders on today's date. I did a couple orders before the webinar started, so I have 6 orders there. If I come back to the portal, okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit submit order at this point. And when that happens, a little dialog pops up and allows the customer in question to do a printing process. This could be emailed or printed. Okay, and they're essentially finishing off the order process. So there's sort of an example of the printed copy. So that's in the portal. Let's go back to sort of Syteline proper, CloudSuite. There was my collection of orders at 6. I'm going to do a little refresh here. I should now have 7 orders. Here's the top one. Notice there's my order. I could look at the line items. Some of you folks are on newer versions of Syteline. We know we have this little tree view here where we can see there's item FA 10,000, FA 20,000. So those are orders being dropped into Syteline via the portal. Pretty cool. Okay, let's look at another ordering scenario. If I go back to the portal, I can do, maybe I do this. I do activity, or no, shop, excuse me. And this time I'm going to do featured products. Just a different way of initiating the order entry process. So now I get a list of featured products, and we will, towards the end of the webinar, we'll talk about some of the Syteline setup setup requirements in order to sort of serve up the data to the portal. But at this point, I could certainly say, yeah, this blue mountain bike, I'm interested in that. So I click on it. It brings up an expanded view of that bike, and I can render as many images as I'd like on the portal. But at this point, I can do sort of the same thing. I say I want 2 of those. Notice my cart up here has nothing in it. I hit add to cart. Now I've added something. And I could go on with that process. What the heck, I'll come over here and finish off that order again. This time, the way I'm doing this is I'm going to my cart and I'm saying, okay, I want to walk through the order placement process, placing the order. Takes a little bit of time. But then, again, I could add more parts here. But I'm going to just walk through a similar kind of process here. Continue. I'll say, what's my payment method? What's my shipment method? And I hit continue. And then I'm going to get the opportunity, as I scroll down here, to submit the order. Again, it's going to give me a chance to print. I won't print this time. But that's, again, if we went back to Syteline proper or to CloudSuite, we had 7 orders in our collection. We do a little refresh, and we should see 8 orders. There's our latest order. Okay, one last scenario we want to show you from an order processing scenario. I don't have any sense if the people on the webinar have the Syteline configurator, product configuration management, the advanced rules-based configurator. But the portal supports that. So if I come over to shop, and let's say I'll do an all products scenario instead of a top sellers or featured products. I'm going to do all products. And I have this configured bike here. If I say something like, yeah, I want to look into this configured bike, if I say I want to configure a quantity of 2 of these, and I hit the Customize button, what the system's then is loading a UI, user interface, that allows me to configure this bike online. So it's going to ask me a series of questions. So we won't go through that process, but the reason we wanted to show you that is to show you that the advanced configurator, now called Product Configuration Management, is supported on the portal. Okay, so that is a run-through on the customer portal. As we look at this, I do want to show you a couple things I forgot to put on the agenda. If I go to account, this is where I can do things like the customer in question can hit the Contact Us button. What that essentially allows for is the identification of a particular question and then emailing to the typically the salesperson in charge of this particular account. If I hit the inbox button, that's where I'd see a lot of dialogue back and forth between the customer and the company, or in particular the salesperson assigned to this customer. Account management is where you can change some settings related to, if there's an address change or a contact change. It allows the customer to execute that online. So that is the customer portal. Now, let's change directions a bit, and let's look at the vendor portal. Now, my system tray down here, notice I have the customer portal here. I'm going to switch over to the vendor portal. And in this case, I'm going to do things like, I want to look at purchase orders. Okay, now, because I was offline for a few minutes, I believe it's going to prompt me for credentials again. So I'll type those in. Typical process of username and password, and I'm hitting sign in. Okay. Now, if you look at the activity menu selection, by the way, notice there's just activity up here. There's no order placement. There's no real way to. There's no concept of adding a PO on the portal. That just probably just doesn't make sense. But if we look at the activity menu selection, we do have quite a few options here. We're looking at the purchase orders option. And when we do that, we get a list of POs for this particular supplier. And again, we're honed into one particular supplier. Let's go back to Syteline for a second and look at the Syteline vendor file. In this case, we are looking at, I'm going to isolate this, Bicycle Parts Company. And by the way, we'll come back to this in a few minutes, but notice back in Syteline on the vendor screen, there's a particular tab now that's related to portal setup and usage. But this is the vendor we're working with. So if I come back to my vendor portal, there I see POs. Again, I could do various searching options, like I want to search for item AL-10,000, and I'll filter that, and then I get a list of POs that include that item. And then, as we've been doing, I can expand that. And in this case, there's my PO. So it's allowing the vendor to sort of have access to PO information online. And they can drill into details. This button over here shows documents that are associated with that particular PO line. And the last thing we want to show you in this section is, this is a case where the vendor can come in and do things like this. They can say, okay, I promise to ship that to you by the end of this week. And when you hit the submit button, then it's actually updating the promise date back in Syteline. So this is a case where we're not only inquiring on data in the vendor portal, but we're actually updating data back in the ERP. That can be handy. This is a way to allow vendors to actually do kind of verification, acknowledgement on the PO, in particular a date. Now, something I haven't mentioned yet, but this is fairly important. The portals are also fairly nicely linked to the Syteline application event system, or what you might think of as the workflow system. And there's a series of sort of pre-built events or workflows that come bundled with Syteline now. They've added to this list. And by the way, I think the portals were first available with Syteline 8. We need to double check and get back to you folks on that, but I think it was made available maybe in one of the later versions of 8. But we will tell you that. And by the way, I am demonstrating obviously in version 9 of the software, specifically 9.020 of Syteline, that is. Now, think about this. So this is a way that you, through the portal, if I hit the submit button there, it is actually updating the promise date on the PO line back in Syteline. Now, as we talked about, there are a series of pre-built workflows or events. You can view those on the form called Workflow Event Handler Activation back in Syteline. And that particular workflow or event is designed to allow the vendor to send an email in an automated way back to the appropriate people or person at the company, indicating that they have just updated the promise date on a PO. So through the portal, we not only updated the date, but then we also communicated that update through an email. And you folks that know the Syteline event system, that email could be sort of external through Outlook, or it could be just a simple alert within the Syteline inbox. Now, I have this particular form filtered for that particular event handler, but if I did this kind of thing and showed you just searching on portal-related events, you're going to see that there's a total of 35 of them. And if I throw this in the grid, I see customer portal, vendor portal, a whole series of events that are specifically designed for the portals. So we want to make sure you saw that. Now, let's get back to the vendor portal. And if we go activity, and let's move off of purchase orders, let's go to planned orders. Now, this is a case where, again, I think I mentioned this in the introduction, if you're using the Syteline APS or MRP system, you know it creates a series of planned orders. You also know through the vendor contracts form, you can identify a preferred or #1 ranked supplier for a particular item. When you do that, those planned orders for a particular vendor, in this case the vendor we're working with, are displayed here in this planned orders area. And much like we talked about before, this is a list of them. I can then expand a particular item, and as I look at the details, I'm seeing here's the planned orders that exist back in the ERP, and I can do things like this. Hit the confirm button, put in a proposed due date, and hit submit. And when that happens, you have some control over what happens back in Syteline. But again, before we go back to Syteline, let's realize this submit button is actually going to insert data, or it's going to change data back in Syteline proper. So if I come back to Syteline and I go back to the vendors form, notice on the portal form here I have things like, A, do I allow the firming of PLNs? So yes, I'm allowing that on this particular vendor. Then when a PLN is firmed, do I create a requisition or do I create a PO line? If I create a PO line, what kind of status do I want, planned or ordered? And then I even have the capability to say I can define a pre-existing replenishment PO, so I'm essentially just creating new either line items or typically what this is really designed for is blanket releases on a blanket PO. So that's the interaction of actually creating a PO or a requisition from a Syteline planned order that was displayed on the portal. Okay, if I come back, let's look at a couple other things briefly. I can do things like on-time delivery. I don't have a whole lot of data here, but what this is designed to do is display for a vendor an on-time delivery snapshot of data. So that can be handy. To show you one other thing here, if I go to activity, this product price contracts, this is a web page that allows the vendor to see and enter what's called vendor contracts back in Syteline, or in older versions of Syteline, vendor item cross-references. So here, the vendor can see these relationships. Again, if I look at this cushion racing seat, look at the part number that's sort of displayed there. If I come back to Syteline and I look at vendor contracts, that's the item number for this, that's the vendor's item number for this internal CP10000 padded seat. So if I go back to the portal again, I can see that, and then I could also do things like, if I expand that, I can see the detailed pricing along with effectivity, and this even allows the vendor to submit a proposed set of new prices with price breaks. So, and there's an approval process for that once that's launched. So it allows you to, the vendor sort of suggest new prices, and then for the customer to, or the customer to approve them, and then you end up getting new vendor contract price records inserted into Syteline or CloudSuite. Okay, that is a walkthrough of the vendor portal. Now, let's spend if I went back to my PowerPoint here, we did a little demo on those two, the customer portal and the vendor portal. This slide says portals integrate directly with Syteline ERP in various ways. Let's just look at a few of these things. Although it's funny, but the very last item on there, application event system, workflow, we already talked about that, and that's some nice features there that allow activity that takes place on the portal to sort of be pushed back to users in Syteline through email or a workflow in general. Now, I'm going to go back to Syteline. Sorry, I'm jumping around here. And I'll show you a few setup considerations here. First, I'm going to go to the users form. Imagine a lot of these folks know how to set up and administer users in Syteline. But here's a portal user. Notice that's who I logged on as, and I was on the vendor portal. When I logged on to the customer portal, I was using this user, portal-customer1. Notice it's not a super user. Notice that in the permission group area, there is a pre-built group for customer vendor portal access. If I go to the modules, I see, in particular, I'm going to throw this into the grid, I see a specific module for Syteline portals. That needs to be in play. So these are some of the things that are necessary from a user setup. Now, another key piece to this puzzle, though, is if I come over to a form, this is a relatively new form called Customer Users. And it's here where I say customer number 1 is linked to this username. That's how I'm enabling a customer to be tied to a user in the ERP system, in Syteline. So, kind of an important setting there. Now, just a few other Syteline settings to be aware of. I'm going to close that, and I'll close users. Now, if I come over to things, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but if I go to accounts receivable parameters, I see on here things like a default bank code. The only reason we're showing you that is that if we were using the reseller portal, a reseller could add a new customer to his list. And when he adds a new customer to his list, he's actually inserting a customer back in the Syteline ERP system. So Syteline needs sort of basic information like a bank code. So that parameter setting there is there specifically to enable portal functionality. That's a small example. There's 8 or 10 of those. There's a form in Syteline now called portal parameters. I think I have that one up. Okay. This does some similar things, but in particular, if you look at the customer and reseller portals, here's a case for when you put an order in the system. You know, you may want to have some way to differentiate regular orders that you ordered just through the standard interface in Syteline versus orders that were brought in through the portal. So that's a place to put in a prefix. So this is another sort of just typical kind of parameter setting. If we look back on the vendors, we looked at that before. There's a tab on the vendors form that dictates interaction with portal functionality. Let's just look at one other. If I go to items, okay, on the items form, there's 2 tabs in particular that are sort of portal oriented. The overview tab, where if you remember when I was doing online order placing, I had sort of settings up here. So if I wanted this particular item, the FA10000 to be included in the top seller list, I'd check that. This is an image that sits inside the Syteline database that can be rendered or that is rendered in the portal. There's also another tab over here on the in Syteline that's the Syteline items form that says pictures. This is a place to put in a series of other pictures that can be displayed on the portal. So this is, again, sort of item-based data that is relevant. And in fact, you have various things there. There's also the notion of an item category, where this is where you're putting a product into a category. If you may remember when I was doing online ordering, I could sort of start the online ordering process by looking at different categories of products. So these are the various ways that, various tools. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are the kinds of things that you'll have to do inside Syteline proper if you move forward with the portals. Okay, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint, and if we look at this, personalizing the portals, I'm going to leave this slide up for a few minutes. You can see it says the following types of changes are supported with pre-built functionality. What we're saying there is, in order to sort of personalize the look and feel of the portal, there's tools that have been made available to the administrator to do these kinds of changes, like things like changing the logo. I won't talk about or itemize every one of those, but what we want you to realize is that you can change the look and feel of the portal using these kinds of pre-built tools.